The photograph lay between them, like a verdict already signed. At 7:30 on the evening of the 7th of March, 1884, the drawing room at Brackenhurst House glowed with candlelight, polished silver, and the distant music of servants preparing a formal dinner. Yet, Nerissa Redgrave, Duchess of Brackenhurst, saw only the cabinet card beneath her husband's hand. It appeared to show her, leaving a private entrance of the Vesper Club, beside Clement Rook, a married radical publisher, whose speeches had offended half the House of Lords. Her own face was unmistakable. So was the charcoal silk gown she had worn during a charitable survey in East London. Rook's head inclined toward hers. Their shoulders seemed almost to touch. Behind them, the club doorway suggested secrecy more effectively than any written accusation. Conrad Redgrave, 7th Duke of Brackenhurst, stood on the opposite side of the table in evening black, one hand resting near the photograph without covering it. He was 42, controlled in public and difficult to surprise. Tonight the control had hardened into something Nerissa could not enter. "Where did you obtain this?" she asked. "Lady Belinda brought it to me 2 days ago." "Of course she did." Conrad's gaze sharpened. She intercepted several copies before they reached the scandal papers. Several. Nerissa lowered her eyes to the card. How fortunate that she knew how many existed. She believed speed mattered more than explanation. "And you agreed." "I agreed that the image could not be ignored." Nerissa picked up the folding magnifier from the writing desk. She had supervised the Brackenhurst Photographic Estate Survey for 7 years. Though the committees praised the house rather than the woman who studied every plate, Conrad knew she examined drainage lines, workers' cottages, and ventilation shafts through a camera lens. He had never asked how much skill the work required. She bent over the cabinet card. A faint, pale border followed the curve of her right shoulder. The line was too delicate for an untrained eye and too deliberate for chance. Her shadow fell toward the street, while the doorway's shadow leaned toward the wall. At the hem of her dress, the edge of the fabric seemed painted rather than photographed. "This image has been altered," she said. "The shadows disagree. There is a masking line around my shoulder, and the lower edge of my gown has been retouched." Conrad came nearer, but not near enough for their sleeves to meet. A photograph records what stood before the camera. A camera records light. Men decide what is placed before the plate, what is hidden from it, and what is printed afterward. "Are you saying you were never with Rook?" Nerissa raised her head. 8 years of marriage stood between the question and the answer. Yet the photograph occupied more space in Conrad's expression than any memory of her. "I have never met Clement Rook privately. I have never left the Vesper Club with him. I have never entered the Vesper Club at all." Conrad looked at the card again. "Belinda said she prevented publication because she feared the damage to you. Belinda has spent the last fortnight correcting my guest lists, reminding you which committee wives prefer precedence, and deciding where your political allies should sit. You were occupied with the survey. I was excluded from 3 meetings concerning my own exhibition." Conrad's jaw tightened. That was Basil's arrangement. "Basil serves you. He serves the office. Then the office has found another duchess useful before the present one has been removed." A knock sounded. The butler entered far enough to announce that the guests had assembled. Through the open doorway, Nerissa saw Lady Belinda Crofton in ivory satin speaking to 2 cabinet ministers' wives as though she already knew which anxieties required soothing. Belinda turned at precisely the right moment. Her expression warmed with concern when she saw Conrad, then softened into pity when it reached Nerissa. The look lasted only a breath. It was enough. Conrad took the photograph from the table. "We cannot discuss this before dinner. No. You have chosen to discuss it through silence before 30 people. I have accused you of nothing. You asked whether I stood beside another man after I told you the image was false." The butler waited without appearing to listen. Nerissa closed the magnifier and placed it beside the lamp. "What do you intend to do with the card?" "Seal it until I can determine the truth." "The truth has already spoken to you." Conrad's face changed, though not enough. "Nerissa, the guests are waiting, Your Grace." The dining room shone beneath crystal chandeliers. Nerissa entered on Conrad's arm because custom required it, though his sleeve felt as distant as if they had crossed the room separately. Lady Belinda sat opposite them, positioned where a political hostess might command conversation without seeming to do so. Before the first course was served, she reminded Conrad that Lord Wrexham's wife disliked fish, quietly redirected an awkward discussion of Irish reform, and signalled the footman when an elderly countess required water. Each act was small. Together they formed a rehearsal. Nerissa answered questions, smiled when etiquette demanded, and touched neither food nor wine. At her right hand stood a plain silver cup, engraved with her initial, one of the pair used at their wedding breakfast on the 12th of November, 1875. Conrad's matching cup stood before him. The household key ring hung from Nerissa's chatelaine at her waist, its blackened silver worn smooth, where her fingers had carried it through years of linen disputes, medicine chest inventories, locked account books, silver room tallies, cellar lists, receiving rooms, and household archives. No guest remarked upon the weight of those duties. They only noticed when the woman carrying them failed. After the final savoury, Conrad rose. Conversation quieted. A footman filled the glasses. Belinda lowered her eyes with graceful reluctance. Already prepared to receive gratitude, she intended to appear too modest to want. Conrad lifted his cup to the lady whose discretion preserved this family's honour. The room understood. Several guests looked toward Belinda. Others avoided looking at Nerissa. Glasses rose beneath the chandeliers. Belinda's cheeks coloured with delicate humility. Nerissa heard crystal touch, crystal around her like a soft public sentence. Conrad did not say her name. He did not need to. She unfastened the household key ring from her waist. 7 keys settled into her palm, cold and heavy. She placed the entire ring beside her untouched silver wedding cup. The sound was small, but the nearest guests heard it. Conrad lowered his glass. "Nerissa, then Lady Belinda has earned the office Your Grace no longer trusts me to hold." Belinda's eyes widened. "My dear, that isn't what anyone intends. You have been arranging the household's political duties for weeks. Tonight, you were publicly thanked for preserving its honour. I would not insult your service by pretending it carries no authority." Conrad reached toward the keys. At the same moment, Nerissa withdrew her hand. Their fingertips brushed over the blackened silver. The contact was brief, familiar enough to wound, and entirely without comfort. Nerissa pulled back first. Conrad stopped. "Don't do this before our guests," he said under his breath. "You did it before our guests." She rose. No chair scraped because the footman drew it back in time. Lady Marjorie Ketteridge, seated halfway down the table, set aside her napkin and stood without waiting for explanation. Nerissa looked at Conrad across the silver, flowers, and lifted glasses. "My maid has packed what I require. I am going to Copley House. For tonight, for as long as dignity requires. Belinda moved as if to come around the table. Nerissa, you're distressed. Nerissa turned toward her. No, I am finished being mistaken for a woman who can endure anything merely because she does so quietly. She left the dining room with Lady Marjorie beside her. Conrad followed as far as the entrance hall, but he did not seize her arm or order the carriage stopped. Beneath the high lamps, Nerissa accepted her cloak from the butler. Conrad stood 3 steps away, his face stripped of the certainty he had carried into the drawing room. I will call tomorrow, he said. Send a note first. You are my wife. That is why you should have believed me. The door opened onto the cold London night. Nerissa descended the steps and entered Lady Marjorie's carriage. She did not look back at Brackenhurst House. Inside the dining room, Belinda approached the abandoned keys. Conrad returned in time to see her hand extend toward them. You will not touch those, he said. Belinda withdrew. I only meant to keep them safe. The senior housekeeper will keep them safe. He summoned the woman at once. Before 2 footmen and the butler, the entire blackened silver ring and all 7 household keys were placed in her custody and carried to the household office. Belinda watched without speaking. Conrad then took the altered cabinet card to his private study, placed it inside an envelope, sealed it with red wax, and wrote the date across the fold. Long after the guests had gone, he broke no seal and summoned no servant. He merely held the card beneath the desk lamp and studied the doorway behind Nerissa's false figure. Her shadow fell toward the street. The stone arch cast its darkness toward the wall. 1 image, 2 directions of light. For the first time that night, Conrad understood that the photograph might be lying. At 9 o'clock on the morning of the 8th of March, Conrad sat alone in his study at Brackenhurst House, with the sealed photographic envelope before him and the breakfast tray cooling at his elbow. The blackened household key ring was not there. It remained in the custody of the senior housekeeper, exactly where he had ordered it, carried the previous night. Its absence made the room feel altered. The desk held only the envelope, unanswered letters, and a sheet of calling paper upon which Conrad had written Nerissa's name twice and struck it out both times. He had spent the night studying the conflicting shadows without breaking the seal. By dawn, he no longer trusted the photograph. He did not yet know whether that meant he trusted himself. At last, he wrote a formal request to call at Copley House at 11. He did not command her return or refer to his rights as her husband. He asked whether she would receive him in Lady Marjorie's presence. Nerissa's reply came 40 minutes later. She would see him. The drawing-room door would remain open. Lady Marjorie would be present. Conrad read the 3 sentences twice, placed the sealed envelope inside a dispatch case, and left Grosvenor Square without summoning Basil. Copley House stood in a quiet Kensington street, narrower than Brackenhurst House, but full of March light. Lady Marjorie sat beside the drawing-room fire with an embroidery frame. She was not working. Nerissa stood near the centre table in a high-necked gown of muted blue. She wore no household keys at her waist. The sight struck Conrad with the force of a fact he had helped create. "Thank you for receiving me," he said. "You ask properly," she replied. The open door remained visible behind him. Conrad set down the dispatch case, the cards still sealed. "Then open it here." He broke the red wax before her and laid the cabinet photograph upon a clean blotter. Nerissa did not reach for it at once. "Did Lady Belinda give you another copy?" "No. She said the rest had been intercepted or withdrawn." "Did you ask where?" "No. Who had received them? No. Why she knew more about their distribution than you did. Not before last night. Lady Marjorie's needle passed through the linen once. A remarkably useful night, she observed. Conrad accepted the rebuke. I saw the shadows. Nerissa took a folding magnifier from a leather case. You saw them after I left. Yes, that distinction matters. She bent over the card. Under the morning light, the pale line around her photographed shoulder appeared clearer than it had beneath candles. Here, the edge is too even to be natural. Someone masked the area around my figure and printed me into another scene. Conrad leaned nearer without crossing her side of the table. The face is sharper than the doorway, because the exposures weren't made at the same distance. Mr. Rook's features are sharper than the wall behind him, while mine are softer than the painted stone beside me. The camera heights also differ. She pointed to the hem. This was retouched by hand. A brush restored the line where the masking left it uncertain. Once seen, the alteration seemed obvious. That made Conrad's failure more painful, not less. How certain are you? Certain that this card doesn't show one honest exposure. Could it still show a real meeting assembled from separate photographs? Nerissa raised her eyes. You're still asking whether the lie might contain enough truth to justify believing it. He did not defend himself. I need to understand every possibility. Then to understand this one first. I wasn't with Clement Rook. Her voice did not rise. On the 24th of February, I was at St. Anne's Model Lodgings in East London. Mrs. Ellison, the matron, was with me. So were two female assistants. We photographed the east doorway because the drainage beside it had failed. Conrad remembered signing an expenditure for replacement guttering without knowing who had inspected it. You directed that survey. I've directed the Brackenhurst Photographic Survey since 1877. I knew you reviewed the reports. You knew the reports arrived. Lady Marjorie lowered her embroidery frame. Conrad looked at Nerissa rather than away. I should have known the difference. Yes. The word carried no satisfaction. Combination printing. How would it be done? Nerissa returned to the card. Two negatives could be printed onto one sheet by masking portions of each. The printer exposes the first figure while shielding the rest, then changes the mask and exposes the second. A registration frame keeps the positions aligned. Retouching conceals the seams. Skilled work can deceive anyone who wants the image to be true. Conrad heard the final sentence as the accusation it was. I wanted it to be true. You wanted certainty more than you wanted to hear me. Silence followed. Conrad looked at the false intimacy on the card. I shouldn't have toasted Belinda. No, I'll write to every guest who was present. Nerissa's expression remained guarded. What will you say? That no accusation against you has been established, and no one is to repeat the image as fact. Don't command them to believe me because you're a duke. I won't. Don't call the matter resolved before the source images are found. I won't. He drew a breath. What conditions will you require for an inquiry? Nerissa closed the magnifier. An independent photographic expert. Not one retained by House Redgrave. Agreed. The card and every later object must remain outside Brackenhurst House. Agreed. No witness is to be paid for silence, testimony, or gratitude. Agreed. And you won't ask me to return because you've begun, correcting what should never have happened. The final condition cost him more than the others. He let that cost remain visible. I agree. Lady Marjorie rang for the solicitor waiting in the morning room at Nerissa's request. He entered carrying a document case and 2 receipts. Conrad did not object to the preparation. Before them, the cabinet card was placed in a fresh envelope, sealed with the solicitor's wax, and entered into neutral custody. The solicitor signed one receipt for Nerissa and another for Conrad. "The mount bears a blind stamp," Nerissa said. The solicitor read the notation copied before sealing it. "Merit Photographic Rooms off Piccadilly." Conrad repeated the name once. It gave suspicion a door through which evidence might enter. With Nerissa's permission, he drafted a correction to the dinner guests. He wrote that no charge had been established against the Duchess of Brackenhurst, that the image was under independent examination, and that repeating rumor as fact would be unjust. He did not call Belinda a liar before proof. When he finished, he handed the draft to Nerissa. She read it. "Send it." Conrad folded the page. "Will you come to Merit's rooms?" "Yes, with Lady Marjorie and the solicitor." "I'll meet you there. Not escort me." "No." At the door he paused, but he did not ask whether she had slept or whether she missed him. Such questions required a tenderness he had forfeited the right to presume. "Nerissa," he said, "I believed the card before I examined it." "You believed it before you examined me." Conrad had no answer worthy of the wound. He bowed and left Copley House. Behind him, the drawing-room door remained open. Ahead, the blind stamp on the copied mount gave him the first honest direction he had possessed, since Lady Belinda placed the lie in his hand. Merit Photographic Rooms occupied the upper floor of a narrow building off Piccadilly, where the morning traffic below reached the studio as a muted roll beneath the sharper sounds of glass, water, and wooden plate holders. On the 9th of March, Nerissa arrived with Lady Marjorie and the solicitor in one carriage. Conrad came separately. He was already waiting beneath the painted sign when they stepped down, but he did not offer his hand or attempt to turn their arrival into a reconciliation witnessed by the street. He merely bowed and followed them upstairs. Tobias Merritt received the party in a Northlight studio crowded with velvet chairs, painted columns, camera stands, and shelves of numbered plate boxes. He was a broad man of 54 with iron-grey whiskers and the wary expression of a tradesman who understood that noble displeasure could ruin him more quickly than honest incompetence. The solicitor placed the sealed cabinet card upon a cleared table and read aloud the date and custody notation before breaking his own wax. Merritt examined the blind stamp first. "The mount is ours," he said. "Cabinet size, ivory stock, supplied from the February shipment." "Was the photograph made here?" Conrad asked. Merritt lifted the card by its edges. "The figures may have been. The scene as printed was not one exposure I remember taking." Nerissa stood opposite him. "Do you keep a day register for every plate, every sitting, every retained negative, and every order?" Merritt crossed to a high desk and unlocked a thick ledger bound in dark calf. The pages smelled faintly of dust and chemical wash. He ran one finger down the entries for February, then stopped. "Clement Rook, plate 317, 12th of February. Exterior portrait near the Vesper Club. One cabinet portrait ordered, negative retained." He turned several leaves. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Brackenhurst, plate 421, 24th of February. St. Anne's Model Lodgings, East Doorway. Survey record. Negative retained." The room went still. "No joint sitting," the solicitor said. "None recorded." "Could one have occurred without being entered?" Conrad asked. Merritt's brows drew together. "Not by my instruction. A plate number is assigned before exposure. The number follows the glass through development, printing, and storage. If two subjects had stood together, there would be one plate entry. Not two made 12 days apart. Nerissa looked at Conrad. He did not look away. The evidence had not yet proved who constructed the lie, but it had removed the last honest excuse for believing the image showed a single moment. Merritt took them into the plate room, where thin wooden sleeves stood upright in numbered ranks. He found the place for 317. The sleeve was empty. 421 was empty as well. Neither bore the red diagonal mark used for sold negatives, nor the black cross used for broken glass. They should be here, he said. Both were marked retained. Who had access? The solicitor asked. Myself, my senior printer, and Miss Talbot, who prepares sleeves and records movements. Assistants may enter during working hours, but no plate leaves without notation. Merritt rang a small bell. Winifred Talbot appeared from the adjoining workroom with developer stains at the cuffs of her plain brown dress. She was 24, slight, and composed until she saw Conrad. Then her face tightened. Your Grace. Miss Talbot, Nerissa said before Conrad could speak. We need only what you remember. No one here will ask you to guess. Winifred's eyes moved to her with visible relief. Merritt showed her the empty sleeves. When did you last see these? Near the end of February. Together, the solicitor asked. Not at first. Winifred folded her hands at her waist. Lord Basil Crofton came on the 25th. He presented His Grace's private secretary's card and said, House Redgrave. Wished to understand combination printing for a future exhibition. Conrad's expression hardened. I gave no such instruction. I know that now, Your Grace. Winifred's voice thinned. At the time, he knew the committee names, the survey titles, and the plate room procedures. He spoke as though refusal would be disobedience to your office. What did he request? Nerissa asked. A private demonstration using 2 existing portraits. He chose Mr. Rook's plate and yours. Why those 2? He said the contrast would be instructive. A political gentleman and an aristocratic lady. He claimed both subjects had agreed. Did Lady Belinda Crofton come here? Winifred hesitated. Twice. Conrad moved closer, but the authority in the room seemed to gather around him. Nerissa saw Winifred's shoulders draw inward. You may answer me, she said. Not the Duke. Winifred met her gaze. Lady Belinda came during the second visit. She examined a trial mount and said, cabinet size looked more respectable than a loose proof. She asked whether a doorway could be altered without changing the figure. What did you tell her? That backgrounds could be masked or replaced if the printer had the source plate and sufficient skill. Did she choose the Vesper Club doorway? I did not hear her name it then. Winifred's fingers twisted together. She said only that a recognizable entrance would make the demonstration persuasive. Merritt stared at his assistant. Why was none of this entered? Lord Basil said it was private work for His Grace and should not appear in the public order book until approval. And you accepted that? His question carried wounded, professional anger. Winifred flinched. He had my father's debt note. The room changed. Even Merritt's indignation stopped. Your father's cottage? He asked. She nodded. After his workshop failed, he borrowed against it. Lord Basil acquired the note. He said one word from him would put my parents out before Easter. Conrad turned to the solicitor. The debt can be discharged today. No, Nerissa said. Conrad looked at her. Her family is being threatened. Then secure them against unlawful seizure. Do not buy the witness before she has spoken. I'm not buying her. Belinda will say you did. Basil will say Miss Talbot exchanged evidence for rescue. Her testimony must belong to her. Winifred looked between them. I don't want money for speaking. "And you will not receive it," Nerissa said. "You may receive legal protection, safe lodging, and employment security whether you testify or not." Conrad's jaw tightened, then eased. Yes, arrange that. He addressed Winifred directly, but his tone had lost its command. "Your father's debt won't be paid by me. Your family will be protected from improper pressure, and your choice remains your own." Winifred swallowed. "There is something else." The solicitor uncapped his pen, but did not write until she continued. "On Lady Belinda's second visit, I heard her speaking to Lord Basil near the drying room. She said his own private note fell due before the month's end. She told him House Crofton could make both notes disappear if the demonstration succeeded." "Both notes," Nerissa repeated. "His and your father's?" "That was what I understood." "What did success mean?" "I don't know." Winifred's eyes filled with shame. "I thought they meant a technical success. I wanted to believe it." Nerissa did not ask for more. The clue was important, but it was still overheard language, not proof of payment or conspiracy. "Will you make a signed statement today?" the solicitor asked. Winifred's face went pale. "Not yet. Lord Basil still holds the note, and if he learns I have spoken—" "You will not be forced," Nerissa said. "Mr. Merritt can record only that you identified the visits and the missing plates. Nothing further will leave this room without your consent." Conrad's first impulse showed in the set of his shoulders, then passed. "Take the time you need," he said. Merritt returned the ledger to the studio table and brought a curved inspection lens beneath an adjustable lamp. The solicitor resealed the cabinet card after Merritt compared its mount stock and crescent trimming nick with the studio samples. Nerissa bent toward the lens to inspect the copied plate numbers. The light struck her eyes too directly. Conrad reached for the lamp, stopped before touching her space, then turned the brass arm so the glare moved away. "Better?" he asked. "Yes." In the curved glass, their reflections appeared side by side, distorted at the edges, but clear at the center. Nerissa saw Conrad watching the evidence rather than her face, as though he understood that attention could not yet be mistaken for tenderness. "I saw enough last night to know I should have examined the card," he said quietly. "You saw enough to know I should been heard." His reflected gaze lifted to hers. Yes, no apology followed. None would have been sufficient while the plates remained missing. Merritt searched a second ledger containing print deliveries. Near the entry for plate 421, he found a notation written by his senior printer. One unretouched contact print had been sent to Mrs. Ellison for inclusion in the St. Anne's charity album. "If the album still holds it," Nerissa said, "we'll have my original scene." The solicitor gathered his receipts. Merritt locked the register. Winifred returned to the plate room. Without promising testimony, she was not yet free to give. Outside, the city continued beneath a pale March sky, unaware that one false photograph had already divided a marriage. Inside the studio, 2 empty sleeves proved that the lie had required more than imagination. Someone had taken the glass itself, and the first untouched image might now be waiting in East London. Bound into an album, no one involved in the scheme had thought important enough to destroy. Mrs. Ada Ellison placed the charity album on the table before anyone had removed a glove. "This book doesn't leave Sands," she said, "not for a duke, a solicitor, or a scandal." It was the 11th of March, and the East London morning had followed Nerissa into the matron's office in the form of soot at the carriage hem and cold air clinging to her cloak. Lady Marjorie sat beside her. The family solicitor opened his document case, but touched nothing. Conrad, had travelled separately from Kensington and now stood near the narrow window, leaving the chair beside Nerissa unclaimed. Mrs. Ellison was a straight-backed woman with iron-grey hair, plain cuffs, and the watchfulness of someone accustomed to defending poor women from benefactors who wished to be thanked more than they wished to listen. "The album will remain here," Nerissa said. "We need only examine one page." Mrs. Ellison studied her face, then untied the faded green ribbon. The brown leather cover opened with a soft crack. Inside were photographs of repaired wash-houses, widened stairways, ventilated nurseries, and courtyards where standing water had once gathered against brick. Each print had been mounted by hand and labelled in a careful script. Mrs. Ellison turned several pages, then stopped. Nerissa saw herself standing alone at the east doorway of St. Anne's Model Lodgings. The same charcoal gown fell in the same folds. The same parasol rested against her left arm. Her head was turned by the same degree as in the false cabinet card. Yet behind her were honest bricks, a drain pipe, and the dark stain of failed guttering. Clement Rook was nowhere in the image. Neither was the Vesper Club. Conrad moved closer, but remained on the opposite side of the table. "May I see the card comparison?" Mrs. Ellison asked. The solicitor removed only a certified photographic copy of the altered cabinet card from his case. The original remained sealed in his custody. He placed the copy beside the album without allowing the two surfaces to touch. Even without a magnifier, the theft was visible. Nerissa's figure had been lifted from the St. Anne's doorway and planted beside Rookay. The line of her sleeve, the angle of her chin, and the crease at her waist were identical. The brickwork and drain pipe had been replaced by a painted entrance designed to imply concealment. "There," Nerissa said, pointing to the lower edge of the false image. The printer had to repaint the hem because the mask cut into the cloth. Conrad looked from one image to the other. "And the camera height?" The St. Anne's camera stood below the step. "That is why the line of my shoulder rises against the doorway. In the false card, the doorway was taken from a higher position. The two perspectives cannot belong to the same exposure." Mrs. Ellison closed one hand over the album's edge. She was here from 11 in the morning until nearly 2. The solicitor uncapped his pen. "Who can confirm that?" "I can. Miss Grant and Miss Phillips assisted with the rooms. We took luncheon after the inspection. The kitchen book records 4 portions, including her Grace's maid." She crossed to a locked cupboard and produced a narrow account book. The entry for the 24th of February listed bread, broth, and tea for the matron. 2 assistants, the Duchess and her maid. "The assistants are working women," Nerissa said. "Their names shouldn't be drawn into newspapers unless the matter cannot be proved without them." Conrad's first response formed in his posture, a readiness to gather every witness and overwhelm doubt with quantity. He stopped himself. "Then their statements remain private unless necessity requires otherwise." Mrs. Ellison looked at him with faint surprise. "That would be sensible." "It would also be just," Nerissa said. Conrad accepted the correction. The solicitor copied the relevant account entry and recorded that the album had remained under Mrs. Ellison's control. No print was removed, no page was cut. If a certified reproduction became necessary, it would be made later under witnesses and returned immediately. Mrs. Ellison turned another page while the solicitor completed his notes. "You should see the rest." Nerissa knew the images before she looked. A laundry yard with a new covered drain, a nursery window altered to improve air, a staircase widened after she had measured how 2 women carrying baskets could not pass safely. Every caption credited the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey. None named her. Conrad read the labels slowly. "You took these?" I chose the positions, inspected the buildings, wrote the recommendations, and reviewed the prints. The committee reports came to my desk. Yes, they bore the Redgrave seal. Yes. He looked at the album as though its anonymous captions had accused him more effectively than any speech. I signed the expenditures. "You signed the last page." Mrs. Ellison's mouth tightened. The useful recommendations were hers. The committee gentleman arrived after the work was finished and spoke as if the bricks had advised them. Conrad glanced toward Nerissa. "Your name will be placed on every catalogue and every print." Her thumb, resting near the album page, became still. "Not now. Why not?" "Because the photograph against me has begun to fail, and any sudden celebration of my work will be called compensation. Belinda will say you invented a capable duchess because the innocent one was easier to defend. But the work is yours. Then it can survive until it is credited for the right reason." His expression sharpened with frustration. "You are refusing recognition to avoid giving liars another argument." "I am refusing to let my work become marital counter-propaganda." The office fell silent. Conrad looked again at the photographs, at 7 years of practical intelligence absorbed into the name of his house. "What do you want done?" he asked. "Preserve the records. Make no announcement without asking me. When the survey is credited, it will be because the evidence of authorship is complete, not because a husband wishes to repair his reputation." "Agreed." The word came without argument. Mrs. Ellison closed the album, but kept her hand upon it. "For what it is worth, Your Grace, the women here know whose work it was." Nerissa gave her a faint smile. "It is worth more than London's applause." On the return to Kensington, Conrad travelled in his own carriage. He did not ask to accompany Nerissa or turn the drive into an opportunity for apology. By the time she reached Copley House, the senior housekeeper from Brackenhurst had arrived with 2 footmen and an inventory of personal effects. Everything had been packed under witness: gowns, correspondence, a writing box, several photographic notebooks, and a small linen-wrapped case were carried into the morning room. The blackened household key ring was not among them. It remained in the senior housekeeper's custody at Brackenhurst House. Nerissa signed the inventory only after checking each line. At the bottom of the final trunk lay the linen-wrapped case. She opened it and found the plain silver cup engraved with her initial, the one that had stood untouched beside the abandoned keys at dinner. For a moment, she saw their wedding breakfast on the 12th of November, 1875. Rain had traced the chapel windows. Conrad had raised the matching cup and promised that nothing spoken against her would find belief in him before it found a hearing. Neither of them had remembered the exact words until the photograph exposed their absence. Lady Marjorie stood near the fire without intruding. "Will you have it put out?" she asked. "No." Nerissa returned the cup to its case. "Not yet." She placed it in the cabinet beside her writing desk and locked the door with a small Copley key that had always belonged to her. The family solicitor arrived before dusk with a new memorandum. His clerk had traced plate 317 through Merritt's delivery register. One original cabinet portrait of Clement Rooker had been sent to the offices of the Sentinel Review on Fleet Street and had never been returned to the studio. "Does the newspapers still possess it?" Nerissa asked. "The editor believes Mr. Rook reclaimed the portrait personally. He has agreed to meet us tomorrow." Conrad, who had remained outside Copley House, until his own formal note was accepted, stood in the open doorway of the morning room when the message was read. If Ruke retained the original, he said, we may prove the second figure was taken alone. Nerissa looked toward the locked cabinet containing the silver cup, then back to the memorandum. The false photograph had already lost one of its shadows. On Fleet Street, the other half of the lie might be waiting in the hands of the man it had used. By noon on the 13th of March, Fleet Street had filled with carts, shouting newsboys, wet paving stones, and the restless urgency of men who believed tomorrow could be printed before supper. The offices of the Sentinel Review occupied 2 upper rooms above a bookcellar, their windows dimmed by smoke and the dust of paper. Nerissa arrived with Lady Marjorie and the family solicitor. Conrad came separately and entered only after the clerk had announced him. No one treated their marriage as permission to abandon the safeguards Nerissa had set. Clement Ruke waited near the editor's desk with a flat leather portfolio beneath one arm. He was 47, broad-shouldered, plainly dressed, and less theatrical than the scandal columns preferred to describe him. A gold wedding band remained visible on his left hand. He bowed first to Nerissa, then to Conrad. "Your Grace," he said to Nerissa, "I'm sorry we meet because strangers have arranged us into an intimacy neither of us possesses." "So am I, Mr. Rook." She took the chair Lady Marjorie indicated. "You have seen the false card?" "A copy. An associated editor showed it to me before deciding whether to print." "And you refused publication?" Conrad asked the editor. The man behind the desk, Mr. Alistair Fenwick, folded his spectacles. "I delayed it. Refusal requires certainty. Delay requires only suspicion, and the image was suspicious." Nerissa looked at Rook. "Have we ever met?" "Never privately. Never publicly. Never by accident. I knew your name from the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey, though, until this week, I did not know the work was yours." He placed the leather portfolio on the desk and opened it himself. Inside lay an original cabinet portrait. Clement Rook stood alone outside the Vesper Club, one hand tucked into his coat, his head turned slightly, as though listening to someone beyond the camera. The doorway behind him matched the false card. So did the angle of his face, the fold at his shoulder, and the fall of light across his cheek. There was no woman beside him. The solicitor asked permission before moving nearer. "The original remains in your possession?" "It does. We would like a certified comparison made under witness. You may have a copy. The original doesn't leave my hand." "Agreed," Nerissa said before anyone else could answer. Rook gave her a brief look of approval. The editor cleared a section of desk. The solicitor removed a certified photographic copy of the altered cabinet card, not the original, which remained sealed in his custody. He placed the copy beside Ruka's portrait. The deception became more precise under direct comparison. Rook's posture was identical. His coat button, the crease beside his collar, and the shadow beneath his hat had all been transferred without alteration. Only the space beside him had changed. Nerissa's figure had been inserted into it and drawn near enough to imply confidence. "The printer used this exact portrait," she said. "There is no need to suppose a second image of Mr. Rook." Rook pointed toward the lower right corner of his mount. "There is also that." A tiny crescent-shaped nick marked the edge of the cabinet stock. The same nick appeared on the altered card copy. "Could 2 mounts carry the same damage?" Conrad asked. The editor leaned closer. "If cut from the same damaged stack, or trimmed by the same defective blade. It doesn't prove the printing occurred at Merritt's," the solicitor said. but it links the physical production more closely. And it proves no meeting, Ruka replied. Whatever else they claim, they cannot truthfully say the camera found us together. Nerissa studied the two separate images. The false card had depended upon respectable surfaces, the club doorway, Ruka's recognizable face, her own title. Cabinet stock chosen to look ordinary. Every element invited the viewer to stop asking questions. "Who sent the copy here?" she asked. Fenwick opened a locked drawer and removed a folded memorandum. The card arrived anonymously on the 4th of March. No covering letter, no demand for money, only the image and a line stating that the Duchess of Brackenhurst had been observed in compromising political company. "Who handled it?" "My clerk received it. I opened it." "Mr. Ruka saw it the same afternoon." "And Lady Belinda?" Conrad asked. Fenwick's expression altered. "Lady Belinda Crofton called 3 days before the dinner at Brackenhurst House." Nerissa felt Lady Marjorie become still beside her. On the 4th, late that afternoon. After the card arrived, the solicitor said, "Yes." Fenwick unfolded the memorandum. "She told me she had learned that malicious copies were circulating. She said she was negotiating their withdrawal for the protection of House Redgrave. She asked whether the Sentinel Review possessed one." Conrad's voice dropped. "Did she know who the subjects were?" "She named both." "Did you show her the card?" "No. She already described it accurately enough that I knew we were discussing the same image." "Did she say how many copies existed?" Nerissa asked. "She said all the copies, which suggested more than one. When I asked where else they had gone, she told me discretion required silence." Fenwick slid the memorandum toward the solicitor. "I wrote this that evening because the visit struck me as unusual. I dated it and had my clerk initial the time." The solicitor read the page without removing it from the desk. "Will you testify to this?" Fenwick replaced his spectacles. "If I am protected from a claim that I conspired in the publication." Conrad answered before Nerissa needed to. "You'll be protected against unsupported accusations and reimbursed for lawful expenses of examination. You won't be paid to remain silent, and you won't be instructed what conclusion to give." Fenwick looked from him to Nerissa. "That is acceptable," Nerissa added. "Your memorandum must stand because you wrote it before any inquiry began, not because a duke later found it useful. That is why I kept it." The solicitor arranged for a certified copy under witness, while the original remained with the editor. Rook's portrait was likewise copied in the office and returned immediately to his portfolio. No evidence object changed hands without a receipt. Conrad stood near the window while the clerk prepared the plates. He had been silent since Fenwick described Belinda's visit. Nerissa could see the calculation in his face. Belinda had told him she intercepted the danger. In truth, she had known its route before he had seen it. She had not merely arrived with a rescue. She had arrived with a story in which she alone could save him. She knew where one copy had gone, Conrad said, and she knew there were others. "Yes," Nerissa replied, "before you toasted her." The words were quiet. He received them without defense. Rook closed his portfolio. "For what it is worth, Your Grace, the St. Anne's work has been discussed among reform groups for months. The recommendations were practical, specific, and unusually free of vanity." Nerissa looked at him. "You knew the survey, but not my name, not until recently." Conrad's gaze moved toward her. "London will know it." "Not because you command London to approve me," Nerissa said. Rook inclined his head. "The work can bear its own name. That is stronger than approval." The meeting ended in a fine rain that blurred the shop signs and darkened the pavement. Lady Marjorie entered the carriage first. Nerissa approached the shallow step, gathering her skirt clear of the wet stone. Conrad stood beside the door. He did not reach for her waist or take her elbow. He extended one gloved hand and waited. "May I?" The question held no audience beyond the coachman and Lady Marjorie, yet it carried more weight than the public gestures of their marriage had ever done. Nerissa looked at his open palm. Then she placed her gloved hand in his. Conrad steadied her for the single step. His grip was firm without closing possessively. The moment her foot reached the carriage floor, he released her. Nerissa paused with one hand on the doorframe. "Thank you." His expression changed, almost imperceptibly. "For helping. For asking." Rain gathered along the brim of his hat. "I should have asked more often." Nerissa entered the carriage before the sentence could become a plea. Conrad stepped back and did not ask to ride with them. As the carriage moved into Fleet Street traffic, the solicitor unfolded his certified copy of Fenwick's memorandum. Belinda had known the path of the false card. She had known more than one copy existed. Somewhere beyond the editor's office, the stolen negatives still remained in unknown hands, along with whatever masks and frames had been used to join two innocent portraits into a single accusation. The lie had been made from separate truths. Now those truths were beginning to find one another. Miss Winifred Talbot arrived at the solicitor's chambers shortly after 10 on the 15th of March, with rain darkening the shoulders of her brown cloak and fear held so tightly in her face that it had become almost formal. Lady Marjorie sat beside the fire. Conrad remained near the window rather than taking the chair closest to the witness. Nerissa sat opposite Miss Talbot at the long table, where clean paper, an uncapped ink bottle, and two independent clerks waited to record every word. The solicitor closed the door to the outer office, but left the connecting door to his clerk's room open. "You may stop at any time," Nerissa said. "Nothing will be signed until it has been read back to you." Miss Talbot removed her gloves finger by finger. "I'm ready." The solicitor asked her to begin with Lord Basil's first visit to Merit Photographic Rooms. "He came on the 25th of February, she said. "He used His Grace's private secretary's card and said House Redgrave required a demonstration of combination printing for a future exhibition. He selected plate 317 and plate 421. "Did he name the subjects?" the solicitor asked. "Yes, Mr. Clement Rook and Her Grace." Miss Talbot looked at Nerissa. "He said both had consented." "I had not," Nerissa replied. "Nor had Mr. Rook." Miss Talbot nodded. "I know that now." She explained the method without ornament. The first plate supplied Rook and the Vesper Club doorway. The second supplied Nerissa's figure from St. Anne's. Black paper masks shielded the portions not meant to print. A brass registration frame kept the exposures aligned. "I made a first proof with the figures far apart," she said. Lady Belinda rejected it. Conrad's attention sharpened. She was present. The following afternoon, she chose cabinet size because she said loose proofs looked experimental, while mounted cards looked respectable. She told me to crop the club entrance closely enough to be recognized, but not closely enough for anyone to study the masonry. Nerissa thought of the painted doorway enlarged beneath Belinda's moral lecture before the lecture had even occurred. What happened to the second proof? Lady Belinda said the figures still looked like strangers. Miss Talbot's hands closed around one another. She marked the final instruction in violet pencil. "Bring Her Grace nearer to him." Lord Basil wrote the crop measurements in the margin. The solicitor's pen moved steadily. How many proofs were made? 3 in all. 2 preliminary proofs and 1 final approved proof. How many cabinet cards? 6 completed cards that I saw. There may not have been more, but I cannot swear to it. And lantern slides? Nerissa asked. 2. Miss Talbot answered without hesitation. 1 was to be used for a lecture or committee display. Lord Basil called it the lecture copy. The other was wrapped and retained with the production materials in case another projection was required. The solicitor repeated the distinction while both clerks recorded it. Lecture slide A, he said. Retained slide B. Miss Talbot confirmed the names. When did you understand the image was not an innocent technical exercise? Conrad asked. When the cabinet mounts arrived. Lord Basil ordered anonymity. Lady Belinda said no one questions an image that looks respectable. Did she say what she intended? Nerissa asked. Miss Talbot's face paled. Not at first. Later, near the drying room. I heard her tell Lord Basil that once society believed the Duchess had compromised House Redgrave. Your Grace would need someone trustworthy beside you, she said. London always forgives a widowed reputation more quickly than a disordered household. Conrad's expression hardened. Nerissa is not dead. Lady Belinda did not mean death. Miss Talbot's voice dropped. She meant absence, separation, she said. You would require a woman who understood committees, political dinners, and the confidence of respectable wives. The room became very still. Belinda's helpfulness at dinner, her correction of guest lists, and her practiced management of Conrad's allies now formed one coherent ambition. She had not needed to become his lover. She had intended to become indispensable in the place Nerissa's disgrace would empty. And Lord Basil? The solicitor asked. He asked what House Crofton would guarantee if the work succeeded. Lady Belinda reminded him that his private note fell due before the end of March. She said her father's solicitor could make his note and my father's note disappear together. Did you see any payment? No. Any written promise? No. Then we record only what you heard, Nerissa said. Not what we wish it proves. Miss Talbot looked relieved. Yes, Your Grace, she continued. On the evening of the 27th of February, after Mr. Merritt had gone home, Basil ordered the materials packed. Miss Talbot placed plate 317, plate 421, the brass registration frame, 2 black paper masks, 3 progressive proofs, and retained slide B into Merritt's green baize plate case. Lecture slide A had already been removed separately for later projection. Who took the case? The solicitor asked. The studio porter carried it to the service lane. A Crofton carriage waited there. Did you see anyone inside? Lady Belinda's maid. I couldn't swear anyone else was in the carriage. Where was it going? Lord Basil, said Brackenhurst House. Conrad spoke at once. It never arrived. I understand that now. Miss Talbot's composure failed for the first time. He told me if I entered the movement in the register, my father would lose the cottage before Easter. The note is genuine. The threat was not. Conrad stepped away from the window. I can discharge the debt today. Nerissa turned toward him. He stopped before she spoke, and the recognition in his face showed that he remembered Piccadilly. No, he said quietly. That would let them call her testimony purchased. Nerissa held his gaze for one breath, then looked back to Miss Talbot. Your family may be protected against unlawful seizure. Lady Marjorie can arrange safe lodging. Mr. Merritt can confirm your employment. None of it will depend upon what you say here. And my father's debt? It will remain subject to lawful terms, the solicitor said. Lord Basil will not be permitted to use private pressure outside those terms. If he attempts it, the attempt will be recorded. Miss Talbot's eyes filled, though no tear fell. Then I'll sign. The solicitor read the statement aloud. Dates, plate numbers, quantities, object descriptions, and exact phrases were checked twice. Miss Talbot corrected one time of day and initialed the change. She signed only after the two clerks signed as witnesses. The statement established how the lie had been made and who had directed its shape. It did not yet establish where the green baize case had gone after the Crofton carriage left the studio. That question remained open. Later that afternoon, Nerissa, Lady Marjorie, Conrad, the solicitor, and Miss Talbot returned to Merritt's rooms so the witness could identify the type of plate tray, masks, and dark cloth used during the work. The original altered cabinet card remained in the solicitor's sealed custody. The source negative remained missing. Merritt placed an empty wooden tray beneath the inspection lamp and drew a dark cloth over one end to demonstrate how alignment marks were checked without stray light. Nerissa bent closer. Conrad, hold this edge. He took the cloth where she indicated. Her hand settled above his through the folded fabric. His fingers supported the same narrow strip from beneath. The contact was softened but unmistakable. Neither moved at once. Conrad looked across the tray at her, his expression quiet and unguarded. He did not turn the accidental nearness into a claim. Nerissa withdrew first. His hand followed a moment later, leaving the cloth exactly where she had placed it. A messenger arrived before Merritt could continue. He carried a printed program for a South Kensington lecture scheduled for the 17th of March. Lady Belinda Crofton would speak on truth and the modern photograph. The listed sequence included several images from the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey. Still without Nerissa's name, beneath the final printed item, someone had added a penciled instruction for the lantern operator. One unlisted slide was to be inserted after the St. Anne's sequence. Nerissa read the line twice. She intends to use my true work to prepare the room for the false image. Conrad took no step towards stopping her decision before she made it. What will you do? Attend. Knowing what she plans, because I know what she plans. Nerissa folded the program and handed it to the solicitor. Somewhere in London, lecture slide A was already waiting for darkness, a lens, and an audience willing to mistake size for truth. By 7:30 on the evening of the 17th of March, every chair in the South Kensington lecture room had been taken, and those who could not sit stood beneath the gas brackets along the walls. Members of photographic societies occupied the front rows beside committee ladies, patrons of model housing, and aristocratic guests who had learned that scandal was more respectable when presented as education. A painted banner above the platform announced truth and the modern photograph. Nerissa entered with Lady Marjorie and the family solicitor, wearing a high-necked gown of deep blue silk without jewels. She had chosen no color that invited pity and no ornament that could be called defiance. Conrad waited near the central aisle. He approached only after Lady Marjorie had taken her place beside Nerissa. The venue steward has agreed to record every slide in the sequence, he said. The solicitor will remain beside the lantern. No plate is to leave the room without witnessed custody. And Miss Talbot? Nerissa asked. She isn't here. Her signed statement remains sealed. Relief passed through her before she could hide it. Belinda would not be given a frightened working woman to expose before an audience that preferred social confidence to truth. Good, Nerissa said. Conrad looked toward the platform. If the unlisted slide appears, I can stop the projection. You may stop the operator from removing it. His gaze returned to her. You intend to leave it on the screen. I intend to decide after I see what she does. He accepted the limit without argument. Lady Belinda Crofton stood beneath the banner in ivory satin, her composure so polished that concern itself seemed part of her costume. Lord Basil remained near the side curtain, speaking quietly with the lantern operator. When Belinda saw Nerissa, she paused for precisely the length required to let nearby guests notice her surprise. Then she came forward with an expression of tender alarm. Nerissa, I hadn't expected you. The program concerns my work. Belinda lowered her voice. You shouldn't feel obliged to endure public curiosity. I don't. Then why come? Because you did. For one instant, Belinda's face became still. Then she smiled and returned to the platform. The lecture began harmlessly. Belinda spoke of portraiture, memory, and the moral obligations of those who possessed cameras. She praised photography as a witness that could not be flattered, bribed, or confused. At the rear of the room, the lantern operator lowered the lamps. The first slides appeared in rectangles of pale light. A repaired washhouse, a widened staircase, a nursery with newly opened ventilation, a courtyard where drains no longer overflowed against the foundations. Nerissa knew every angle. She had measured those walls, placed the tripod, and written the recommendations. Belinda introduced them as achievements of the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey. She never spoke Nerissa's name. Conrad sat across the aisle from her, close enough to hear, but not close enough to claim her company. Those photographs are yours, he said quietly. Not in this room. Nerissa kept her eyes on the screen. Here they belong to the house. His expression tightened. He did not answer. Belinda continued with examples of retouching considered acceptable in respectable portraiture. A blemish softened, a fold corrected, a painted backdrop improved. She warned that manipulation became immoral only when it altered the meaning of an event. Then she turned toward the lantern operator. Before we conclude, I'm told there is one final example concerning the danger of malicious photographic invention. The printed program contained no such item. Nerissa felt Lady Marjorie's fan become motionless beside her. At the rear, Basil stepped away from the lantern table. A glass slide entered the carrier. The screen flashed white, blurred, and sharpened. Nerissa's false image rose before the room nearly 6 feet high. There she stood beside Clement Rouquet, outside the Vesper Club, her shoulder drawn toward his head lowered as if they shared a confidence too intimate for daylight. Magnification turned suggestion into spectacle. A woman gasped. Someone whispered Rouquet's name. Several guests who had attended the Brackenhurst dinner looked toward Nerissa before remembering manners and looking away. Belinda turned to the screen as though the image had appeared without her knowledge. One hand rose to her breast. "Stop the lantern," Conrad said, already standing. The operator reached for the shutter. "Leave it," Nerissa said. She did not raise her voice. The command carried because it contained no panic. Conrad looked at her. The operator froze with his hand above the mechanism. Nerissa rose and walked down the aisle. The false image remained above her, larger than her body and brighter than any living face in the room. She mounted the platform without accepting assistance. Belinda moved toward her. "Nerissa, I had no idea this was among my slides." "Then you'll wish it examined before anyone removes it." A murmur crossed the room. Nerissa faced the audience. "This image has been presented as evidence of a meeting that never occurred." Since it has been placed before you, it may also demonstrate how readily an image can imitate truth. She lifted one hand toward the pale border around her projected shoulder. Observe this line. It marks the edge of a mask used while one figure was printed into a scene belonging to another exposure. Several photographers leaned forward. One raised a pocket glass. Nerissa pointed lower. My shadow falls toward the street. The doorway's shadow falls toward the wall. They cannot have been made beneath the same light. The operator adjusted the focus at her request. The painted hem became visible. So did the slight difference in grain between her face and the club entrance. The camera heights also disagree, she continued. My source image was taken from below a step at St. Anne's Model Lodgings. Mr. Rook's portrait was taken from a higher position outside the Vesper Club. The figures were never photographed together. A gentleman in the front row stood. There is retouching at the gown. Yes, the mask cut into the fabric. A brush restored the line afterward. Belinda stepped forward. This is monstrous. Some enemy must intend to injure both Her Grace and House Redgrave. An enemy who knew your program would contain an unlisted slide, Lady Marjorie said from her seat. The room shifted again. Basil approached the platform with measured concern. The more serious question may be, who has influenced those now claiming manufacture? I understand a plate room assistant with family debts has received protection from persons attached to Her Grace. Nerissa turned toward him. Miss Talbot has received no payment. Protection may take many forms. So may coercion, Conrad said. The room quieted. He came to the edge of the platform but did not mount it. No witness has been paid by House Redgrave. No accusation against the Duchess has been established. The image will be secured and examined under independent authority. Basil's mouth tightened. Conrad's gaze stopped him before he could reply. Nerissa looked toward the venue steward. Remove the slide yourself. Don't hand it to Lord Basil, Lady Belinda, the Duke, or me. The steward approached the lantern with the solicitor beside him. Before witnesses, he closed the shutter and waited for the glass to cool. He removed lecture slide A by its edges, placed it in a padded wooden box, and fastened the lid. The solicitor sealed the box with red wax, recorded the time, and named everyone standing within reach. Belinda watched without moving. You're treating me as though I arranged this, she said. I'm treating the slide as evidence, Nerissa replied. What it says about you will depend upon where the evidence leads. The lecture ended without applause. Guests gathered in strained clusters, while committee officers demanded to know who had altered the sequence. Nerissa descended from the platform. Her composure held until the screen went dark behind her. Then every face in the room seemed too eager, too careful, or too ashamed. Conrad stood several feet away. He extended his arm and waited. May I help you through the crowd? Nerissa looked at the sleeve he offered. At Fleet Street, she had given him her hand for a single carriage step. This would be different. To accept his arm now would allow the room to see them leave together, not reconciled, but allied under scrutiny. He did not move closer. Nerissa placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve. You may. Conrad covered no part of her hand. He walked at the pace she set. Lady Marjorie joined them on Nerissa's other side, and together they passed through the whispering audience while Basil watched from the platform and Belinda stood beneath the blank screen. Outside, Conrad stopped beside Nerissa's carriage. You made them examine the image instead of examining you, he said. The image was already examining me. Nerissa released his arm. I merely taught the room how to see. He bowed and stepped back without asking where he might call next. The following morning, before breakfast had been cleared at Copley House, a committee messenger delivered an order bearing Conrad's signature. Until further notice, every photograph in the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey had been withdrawn from public display. Nerissa read the sentence twice. In trying to bury one false image, her husband had erased every true one with it. Nerissa was still holding Conrad's withdrawal order when his calling card arrived at Copley House. On the morning of the 18th of March, the notice lay across the breakfast table beside an untouched cup of tea. Every photograph in the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey had been removed from public display until further review. No distinction had been made between the false lantern image and the genuine work. Nerissa had directed for 7 years. Lady Marjorie read the order once, then placed it down with deliberate care. He believes he has removed the weapon. He has removed the evidence that I ever did anything worth seeing, Nerissa replied. Conrad was admitted at 9:30. He entered the drawing room alone. The door remained open, and Lady Marjorie stayed near the window with her embroidery frame. Nerissa stood beside the writing table, the committee order laid flat before her. You withdrew every survey photograph, she said, until the committee can guarantee that no further image will be substituted, including the St. Anne's photographs. Yes, including the contact print that helps prove where I was. The album remains at St. Anne's. I withdrew only the exhibition copies. You withdrew the truth because someone weaponized a lie. Conrad came no nearer. I was trying to prevent another public attack. You were trying to make the danger disappear from your sight. His jaw tightened. The lecture room proved the committee couldn't protect the sequence. Then protect the sequence. Protect the custody. Protect the labels. Don't erase the woman who made the work. Nerissa, there wasn't time to consult you before the morning notices went out. There was time to sign your name. The words landed without force, which made them harder to resist. Conrad looked toward the order. I believed I was shielding you. At dinner, you chose the appearance of House Redgrave over my denial. After the lecture, you chose the appearance of House Redgrave over my work. The method changed. The instinct didn't. His face lost its defense. Nerissa placed both hands on the table. Do not love me by making me disappear. Silence followed. Conrad did not seize upon the word love. He did not tell her his intention mattered more than the result. Beyond the open door, a maid crossed the passage and vanished without sound. What do you intend to do? He asked at last. Suspend our joint inquiry. The answer struck him more visibly than anger would have done. Nerissa, I'm not ending the investigation. I'm removing it from authority that has acted over me twice. She drew a document from beneath the withdrawal order. I have resigned from the exhibition committee. The family solicitor will engage an independent photographic examiner. Every report will go to us at the same time. Neither Brackenhurst House nor House Crofton will control the evidence. Conrad read the first lines without touching the page. You no longer trust me with the process, not while fear allows you to decide first and explain afterward. And if I accept these terms, then you will have accepted them. It won't purchase my return. His gaze held hers. I understand. Nerissa indicated the acknowledgement prepared by the solicitor. Conrad signed it without requesting private access, priority reports, or authority over the recovered plates. When he laid down the pen, she said, reverse the withdrawal. I will, not as a gesture to me. No, his voice roughened, as a correction of my mistake. He bowed to Lady Marjorie, then to Nerissa. She offered no hand. Conrad left without asking when he might call again. By noon, Belinda's counterattack had begun. A society column reported that the plate room assistant, connected with the Duchess's defense, had a father burdened by debt. Another paper noted that Nerissa had supported model lodgings associated with a widowed cousin of Miss Talbot. Neither item directly accused Nerissa of buying testimony. Together, they encouraged readers to construct the accusation themselves. At the solicitor's chambers that afternoon, Winifred Talbot sat white-faced beneath the high windows, while Nerissa read the clippings. "My cousin stayed at St. Anne's after her husband died," Miss Talbot said. "Her child was ill, and the nursery accepted them for 3 months. I didn't know the Brackenhurst subscription had anything to do with you. It began 2 years before you entered Merritt's employment," Nerissa said. "That is the fact we will publish." The solicitor folded one clipping. "We should also state that no debt has been discharged and no promise of payment has been made. Yes, include the date of every subscription and the conditions of Miss Talbot's lodging." Miss Talbot looked at Nerissa. "They'll write about my father." "They will." Nerissa did not insult her with false reassurance, but secrecy would allow Basil to define the debt for you. The record gives him less room. Lady Marjorie arranged temporary lodging for Miss Talbot in the home of a respectable widow near Russell Square. The offer was written without condition. Merritt provided a separate letter guaranteeing that Miss Talbot's employment would not depend upon testimony favorable to either House Redgrave or House Crofton. The solicitor copied both documents into the file. Nothing remained private enough to be recast as payment. Before 3 o'clock, Tobias Merritt arrived with the studio porter, Samuel Pike, a narrow young man who twisted his cap until the brim bent between his fingers. Pike had carried the green baize plate case through the service passage on the evening of the 27th of February. "Lord Basil said it was going to Brackenhurst House," he told the solicitor. A Crofton carriage waited in the lane. "How did you identify it?" Nerissa asked. The crest was painted on the door. I'd seen the same carriage bring Lady Belinda to the studio. "Who was inside?" "Her maid. I couldn't swear to anyone else." "Which direction did the carriage take?" "South." Pike swallowed. "That's why I remember." Grosvenor Square was the other way. The coachman turned toward the river. Merritt placed his sales ledger beside Pike's statement. The case was never sold, loaned, or discarded. "My brass ownership plate is riveted beneath the lid." The solicitor asked whether Basil had used storage premises south of the river. Conrad arrived while the question was being recorded. He had sent a formal note before coming and took the chair farthest from Nerissa's papers. "There is a warehouse in Lambeth," he said, only after the solicitor invited him to speak. "Basil submitted storage invoices last autumn for theatrical scenery and committee materials." "Why did you approve them?" Nerissa asked. "He said the space served a charitable entertainment committee." "I didn't verify it." Conrad did not soften the admission. "I should have." The solicitor wrote down the location. "Do the invoices name the keeper?" "Yes. They also bear the Crofton account reference." That was enough for inquiry, not enough for accusation. The green case might have continued elsewhere. It might have been emptied. The glass might already have been broken. Nerissa looked toward Samuel Pike. "Will you sign that you saw the case enter the Crofton carriage and travel south?" "If my position is protected." "Your position will be protected whether the warehouse contains evidence or dust." Pike signed. Merritt signed beneath him. Conrad then placed a folded committee notice on the table. He had reversed the withdrawal before leaving Brackenhurst House. The Brackenhurst Improvement Survey would return to display under secured sequence control. Every catalogue entry would identify the work as directed and supervised by Nerissa Redgrave, Duchess of Brackenhurst. The notice contained no reference to their marriage, and no claim that the credit was compensation. Nerissa read it slowly. You restored my name before the plates were found. The name was yours before they were stolen. Their eyes met across the table. There was no touch between them, no forgiveness. Yet Conrad had corrected a wrong, without waiting to know whether correction would bring her closer. The solicitor gathered Pike's statement, Merritt's ledger copy, the Crofton storage invoices, and Miss Talbot's sealed testimony. Together, they established probable grounds to seek authority from a police magistrate for a search of the Lambeth warehouse. As evening settled over Lincoln's Inn, a clerk left with the application, somewhere south of the river, behind a door paid for through Crofton accounts. The missing negatives might still be standing upright in Merritt's green baize case. By the following morning, Basil would either learn that the search was coming or discover that truth had reached the warehouse before he could remove it. On the 23rd of March, Conrad's calling note reached Copley House shortly after 2, carried by a footman who waited in the entrance hall for a written answer rather than assuming the Duke would be admitted. During the intervening days, the application to search the Lambeth warehouse had moved through affidavits and the scrutiny of a police magistrate. By morning, the authority had been granted. The search would begin at 9 the following day. Conrad asked to speak with Nerissa before anyone knew whether the green baize case still existed. She received him at 3 in the drawing room. Lady Marjorie sat in the adjoining morning room with the connecting door open. No solicitor attended. No evidence lay waiting on the table. Conrad entered, carrying 2 folded documents and nothing else. He bowed, then remained standing until Nerissa indicated the chair opposite hers. "Thank you for seeing me." "You asked before coming. I'll keep doing so." Nerissa did not answer. Pale March light fell across the carpet between them. Conrad treated the distance as something he had no right to cross. He placed the first document on the table. "This is the inventory transferring every photographic plate, print register, exhibition, paper, and committee letter held at Brackenhurst House into the solicitor's custody." Nerissa looked at the signatures. The senior housekeeper and 2 clerks had witnessed the removal. The blackened household key ring was not listed among the transferred items. It remained in the housekeeper's custody, where it had been since the dinner. "Why transfer the entire archive?" Nerissa asked. "Because I shouldn't control an inquiry after using control against you twice. The warehouse hasn't been searched. No. The missing negatives may be broken. Yes, the case may be empty. It may." Conrad placed the second document beside the first. "That is why I sent this today." Nerissa unfolded it. The statement had been addressed to every guest present at the dinner and every member of the exhibition committee. It did not claim the warehouse would prove her innocent or accuse Belinda and Basil before the search. It stated only what Conrad himself had done. "You sent this already?" she asked. "Before I came here." Nerissa read the opening lines again. "You admit that you believed the photograph before an independent examination." "I did." "You admit that the toast publicly implied an accusation." "Yes." "You admit that withdrawing the survey erased my work." "Yes." His answers were quiet, without any attempt to soften them. Nerissa set the statement down. Say it without the paper. Conrad looked at her. For the first time since he entered, his composure showed strain. I believed a constructed image over your direct denial. I looked at a card made by strangers and treated it as more trustworthy than the woman who had lived beside me for 8 years. His right hand closed once against his knee. Then I raised a cup to Belinda before our guests. I told myself I hadn't accused you because I never named the accusation. That was cowardice. The room understood what I meant, and I allowed you to bear it alone. Nerissa remained still. The dinner returned not as noise, but as the silence between lifted glasses. Conrad continued. After the lecture, I withdrew your work without asking you. I thought I was preventing another humiliation. I erased what was true because I couldn't endure the possibility of seeing you attacked again. You couldn't endure seeing it, Nerissa said, so you made certain no one could see me. Yes. The word left him without defense. I made your composure carry the weight of my fear. The sentence settled between them. Nerissa had heard apologies that asked to be admired for existing. This one offered no escape from consequence. Why send the statement before the search, she asked. Because your innocence shouldn't depend upon whether the missing evidence survived. Even if the warehouse contains dust, I still did those things. And if society says you've been made ridiculous by your wife, then I'll say I made myself ridiculous by refusing to hear her. If the committee removes you, they may. If your political allies call public admission weak, they may do that, too. Conrad did not look away. I'm not asking you to save me from any of it. Lady Marjorie's shadow remained visible beyond the open doorway, steady and discreet. Nerissa looked again at the statement. What do you want from me today? Nothing you haven't chosen. You hope for something. His breath changed. Yes. What? I hope there is still a way to become a man you can trust. I don't expect that hope to create an obligation in you. Nerissa studied him. The Duke, who had once believed rank could control scandal, now sat in her house, admitting that desire granted him no authority. You've learned the language of restraint, she said. I'm trying to learn the conduct. Words will not be enough. I know. Conrad opened his right hand and placed it palm upward on the table. He did not move it toward her. May I hold your hand? The question was more intimate than his assistance at Fleet Street or his offered arm at South Kensington. No carriage step excused it. No crowd required it. He was asking for contact because he wanted comfort and because he understood she might refuse. Nerissa looked at his waiting hand. Then she removed her right glove. She laid her bare hand in his. Conrad's fingers closed carefully around hers. He did not pull her nearer. His thumb rested without movement beside her knuckle. Warmth traveled through her palm, quiet and human, untouched by spectacle. They remained like that through several breaths. I loved you, Nerissa said. Conrad's grip changed by the smallest degree. I loved you while I arranged your dinners, corrected your correspondence, remembered which guests couldn't be seated together, and made every difficulty disappear before it reached your desk. I believed being necessary meant I was cherished. You were cherished, not in a way I could safely recognize. Pain crossed his face. He did not argue. Then I failed to make love visible where it mattered. You made usefulness visible. You made obedience comfortable. You made silence easy to mistake for contentment. Yes. Nerissa looked down at their joined hands. I don't know what remains of what I felt. I know only that I won't return to the marriage I left, because you have finally described its wound. I won't ask you to. The truth must be made public even if the warehouse is empty. It will. You won't speak over me when the evidence is presented. I won't. You won't pay witnesses, command belief, or turn punishment into proof of love. No. And you won't ask me to come home afterward. Conrad held her gaze. Copley House is your home. I understand that now. Nerissa let the answer settle before gently withdrawing her hand. Conrad released her at once. The warmth of his palm remained against her skin. She replaced her glove, rose, and crossed to the small cabinet beside the writing desk. From it, she took the linen-wrapped box delivered from Brackenhurst House. She opened the lid. The plain silver wedding cup lay inside, its engraved initial darkened by age. Conrad did not stand. He looked at the cup as though it belonged to a language he had once spoken carelessly. I kept the other one, he said. I know. Nerissa touched the rim, but did not lift it. This isn't a promise. No. It isn't forgiveness. No. It is only proof that something can remain intact without being ready for use. Conrad's expression broke for one unguarded instant. Then he stood and bowed. The search begins tomorrow morning, and whatever they find, the truth goes forward. Nerissa watched him leave through the open door. His statement remained beside the archive receipt. The silver cup returned to its box. Neither object offered reconciliation. Both proved that, before certainty arrived, Conrad had finally chosen accountability. The green baize case was found beneath a painted woodland flat at 9:20 on the morning of the 24th of March, wedged behind two theatrical columns in the far corner of the Lambeth warehouse. A Metropolitan Police Inspector entered first under authority granted by a police magistrate, followed by two constables, the family solicitor, Tobias Merritt, the warehouse keeper, Conrad, Nerissa, and Lady Marjorie. No one touched the case when it came into view. Damp rope, dust, and old size thickened the air. The inspector marked the position in his notebook. One constable examined the floor and the crates surrounding it. Merritt knelt only far enough to see the brass plate riveted beneath the lid. That's mine, he said. Merritt Photographic Rooms. The case was made for retained glass negatives. The warehouse keeper, a pale man named George Vane, rubbed his palms against his coat. Lord Basil instructed me that the scenery and everything behind it were to remain private. Under whose account was the space hired? The inspector asked. Crofton. The invoices went through Lord Basil. But the remittances came from the Crofton solicitor. The family solicitor exchanged a look with Nerissa. You will notify the named account holder that officers are examining the stored property, the inspector said. Send your clerk now. Lord Basil may attend, but he will not interfere. Vane dispatched a boy with a written message. Only after the inspector had recorded every witness did Merritt authorize the lock to be opened. No key had been supplied. A constable forced the simple mechanism without damaging the lid. When the case opened, silence gathered around the table. Two glass negatives stood upright in padded slots, each wrapped in black paper and marked in white pencil. 317, 421. Beside them lay the brass registration frame, exactly 2 black paper masks, 3 progressive proof prints, and a lantern slide wrapped in tissue. Retained slide B, Nerissa said. Lecture slide A remains sealed with the solicitor. The solicitor confirmed the distinction for the record. The inspector numbered each item before it was moved. Merritt lifted plate 317 by the edges beneath the warehouse window. Clement Rook stood alone before the Vesper Club. Plate 421 showed Nerissa alone at the east doorway of St. Anne's model lodgings. Both negatives were intact. No crack crossed the glass. No emulsion had been scraped away. "These are the missing plates," Merritt said. "The numbers, sleeves, and retained status match my register." Nerissa felt the truth of the intact glass more sharply than relief. Belinda and Basil had not hidden ruined evidence. They had preserved the means to print the accusation again. The inspector ordered the plates returned to the padded case until separate evidence carriers were prepared. The 3 progressive proofs were laid flat beneath clean paper. In the first, Nerissa and Rookie stood several feet apart. In the second, her figure had been moved nearer. In the third, her shoulder rested beneath the angle of Rookie's lowered face. Violet pencil marked the margin. "Bring her Grace nearer to him." The handwriting was narrow and slanted. Another margin contained crop measurements in Basil's square hand. The masks matched the figures. One shielded the background around Rookie. The other isolated Nerissa from the St. Anne's doorway. The brass frame bore small alignment marks corresponding to the edges of both proofs. "This is enough to reproduce the method," Merritt said. "Not here," the inspector replied. "Everything will be sealed for examination." The solicitor opened a separate packet containing certified warehouse accounts. One entry showed storage paid from Crofton funds on the 28th of February. Another, dated the 2nd of March, listed a remittance from the Crofton family solicitor to a private lender holding a note in Basil Crofton's name. The amount did not discharge the entire debt, but it covered the sum due before the end of March. Miss Talbot heard Lady Belinda promise that House Crofton would make Basil's private note disappear if the work succeeded, Nerissa said. "This does not prove every word of the bargain, but it corroborates the timing." Conrad read the remittance entry once. He used my office to obtain the plates, then accepted Crofton money. "The document establishes payment," the family solicitor said. "Intent will require the full chain." "Then we preserve the chain," Nerissa replied. Every object was placed into a numbered container. The source negatives went into a reinforced carrier. The masks and registration frame entered a second box. The proofs were secured between boards. Retained slide B received its own padded case. The green baize case was sealed last as Merritt's stolen property. The lecture slide remained elsewhere in the solicitor's custody. Nothing was combined merely for convenience. Basil arrived before the final inventory was complete. The warehouse keeper's clerk had found him at a nearby committee office. He entered in a dark overcoat with anger prepared upon his face, then stopped when he saw the open case and the officers beside it. This search exceeds any reasonable authority. The inspector produced the magistrate's paper. "You were notified because the storage account bears your name. You may observe. You may not touch anything." Basil turned to Conrad. "Your Grace, these materials were acquired as discarded studio stock for a private demonstration." Merritt answered before Conrad could. "They weren't discarded, sold, or loaned. My ownership plate is fixed to the case, and both negatives are marked retained in my register." Basil looked toward Nerissa. "Then Miss Talbot has misunderstood an innocent exercise." "An innocent exercise doesn't require anonymous cabinet cards, 2 lantern slides, a false story sent to an editor, and pressure against a witness's family," Nerissa said. "You have no proof I pressured anyone. That will be tested by statements and records," the inspector replied. Conrad removed a folded document from his coat. "Your employment as my private secretary ends today." Basil stared at him. "Before any charge is proved." I'm dismissing you for using my office without authority, removing property under false pretenses, concealing it in premises paid through the Crofton account, and placing House Redgrave behind conduct I neither ordered nor knew. You approved my discretion for years. I approved efficiency because it spared me scrutiny. That negligence is mine. It does not make your acts authorized. Conrad handed the dismissal to the family solicitor. You'll surrender every key, paper, and seal connected with my office. Basil looked toward the inspector, then removed a ring of office keys and a small seal from his pocket. The blackened household key ring was not among them. That remained at Brackenhurst House under the senior housekeeper's custody. Basil's private secretary keys were listed and sealed separately. He was not arrested that morning. The inspector stated that the recovered property, witness statements, financial records, and technical examination would be placed before the appropriate authorities. Basil left without office, without access, and without the borrowed certainty of Conrad's name. When the warehouse doors closed behind him, Conrad turned to the solicitor. Notify the photographic charity that I'm withdrawing from the chairmanship until the inquiry is concluded. Nerissa looked at him. The committee hasn't demanded it. It shouldn't need to. Your political opponents will use the withdrawal. Then they'll use something true. He signed the notice beside the evidence inventory. He did not look at Nerissa for approval. He did not call the consequence sacrifice. Outside, fine rain silvered the cobbles. Lady Marjorie walked ahead with the solicitor while the constables carried the sealed evidence toward a legal carriage. Nerissa and Conrad remained beneath the loading awning. The work will continue, Conrad said, whether you return to me or not. His face held fatigue rather than expectation. Nerissa saw no duke offering rescue, only a man standing inside the cost of what his blindness had permitted. She stepped toward him and placed her arms around him. Conrad did not move for one suspended heartbeat. Then his arms came around her carefully, one hand resting between her shoulder blades, the other light at her side. He did not draw her closer than she had chosen. Relief moved through Nerissa, painful and warm. His breath caught near her temple. Neither spoke. The embrace lasted only long enough to become honest. Nerissa released him first. Conrad let her go at once. No kiss followed. Across the yard, a messenger hurried through the rain, carrying a card addressed to the Duke of Brackenhurst. Lady Belinda Crofton requested a private audience and offered, in her own hand, to explain everything. The technical examination began at Merritt's studio on the morning of the 27th of March, beneath a pale north light that revealed every imperfection without drama. The recovered source negatives, brass registration frame, 2 black paper masks, 3 progressive proofs, and retained slide B arrived in separate sealed containers from the solicitor's custody. Lecture slide A remained in its own padded box, sealed since the South Kensington lecture. The original altered cabinet card also remained under legal seal until the solicitor broke it before the assembled witnesses. Present were Nerissa, Conrad, Lady Marjorie, Tobias Merritt, Miss Winifred Talbot, the independent photographic examiner, the family solicitor, and 2 clerks. Each object was named, inspected, and entered into the daybook before anyone touched it. The examiner produced fresh contact prints from plate 317 and plate 421. The first showed Clement Rook alone outside the Vesper Club. The second showed Nerissa alone at St. Anne's Model Lodgings. He then tested the recovered masks against the 2 figures and confirmed that their cut edges corresponded exactly to the pale border visible around Nerissa's shoulder in the false image. The brass frame aligned the two exposures at the same points marked in Basil's hand. One controlled composite was printed under observation. It required several hours of exposure, development, washing, and drying before comparison could begin. No one left the studio while the process remained incomplete. By late afternoon, the controlled print lay beside the altered cabinet card and both lantern slides. The examiner used a magnifying lens to compare the masking line, scale, crop, and retouched hem. The same constructed image appears in all three, he said. The cabinet card, lecture slide A and retained slide B derive from the same combination arrangement. The recovered frame and masks reproduce that arrangement. He did not perform the entire public demonstration, the detailed sequence of separate figures becoming false intimacy was reserved for the witnessed examination to come. He confirmed only that the method worked. The recovered tools fit the source plates, and the result matched the accusation. The solicitor numbered every comparison sheet and sealed the completed technical record. Miss Talbot then examined the progressive proofs. She identified the first and second preliminary versions and the final approved proof. Lady Belinda wrote this, she said, pointing to the violet pencil instruction. Bring her Grace nearer to him. She identified Basil's square crop measurements on the adjacent margin. He wrote those while Lady Belinda stood beside him. The solicitor asked whether she could repeat what she had heard near the drying room. Miss Talbot did so carefully, without adding what she had not witnessed. Belinda had said that once society believed Nerissa had compromised House Redgrave, Conrad would require a woman whom respectable wives and political committees could trust. She had promised that House Crofton could relieve Basil's private note if the work succeeded. The warehouse remittance records now supported the timing of that promise. Conrad asked only one question. Did Lady Belinda ever describe the work as a warning intended for Nerissa herself? No, Your Grace. She described it as a change in household confidence. The answer carried no melodrama. It was more damaging for its precision. Before sunset, the technical file was complete. The false image could be reconstructed. Its tools had been recovered. Its two lantern forms had been matched. The source subjects had never shared an exposure. The full proof would be presented publicly on the 30th of March. Lady Belinda's requested audience took place the following afternoon at Copley House. Nerissa received her in the drawing room with Lady Marjorie near the window, Belinda's companion beside the hearth, and the family solicitor waiting in the adjoining morning room. The connecting door remained open. Conrad stood near the mantel but did not take the central chair. That place belonged to Nerissa. Belinda wore dove-grey silk and an expression of injured composure. She looked first at Conrad. I came because Basil has turned an exercise in caution into something monstrous. Nerissa folded her hands in her lap, then explained the exercise. Basil proposed that we demonstrate how easily an image could be manipulated against House Redgrave. I agreed because your association with reform work made you vulnerable to political invention. You selected Clement Rook. Basil suggested him. You selected the cabinet mount, the doorway crop, and the distance between the figures. Belinda's gaze flickered. I chose the least damaging arrangement. You wrote, "Bring her Grace nearer to him." The color left Belinda's face, then returned beneath discipline, because Basil had already made something cruder. I was attempting to control the impression. You visited Mr. Fenwick before Conrad saw the card, Nerissa said. You described the image without being shown it, and spoke of withdrawing all copies. I was trying to contain what Basil had done. Conrad's voice remained level. You told me you had intercepted a danger created by others. Belinda turned toward him. I was protecting you. From a scheme you helped direct. From a scandal Nerissa's choices made possible. Nerissa's posture did not change. Which choice? Her insistence upon East End surveys, her association with reform committees, her refusal to understand how society reads a duchess who behaves as though rank excuses independence. Lady Marjorie's fan closed softly. Belinda continued before anyone interrupted. You were absent from the political rooms that mattered, Nerissa. Conrad needed someone who understood which wives could be trusted, which dinners preserved alliances, which committees required a woman who did not invite controversy. There it was. Not love, not desire. Replacement. Belinda looked at Conrad with a confidence built from years of usefulness offered at the correct moment. After the photograph, she would have withdrawn from London. Everyone knew it. You would have needed a hostess society could accept beside you. I intended to prevent House Redgrave from collapsing into disorder. Conrad stepped away from the mantel. You intended to make yourself necessary by destroying her credibility. I intended to preserve your position, at the cost of hers. Belinda reached into her reticule and drew out a folded sheet. I will sign a full statement. I'll say, Basil directed the printing, threatened Miss Talbot, removed the plates, and distributed the cards. But you must state publicly that I acted only after learning what he had done. You must say I tried to protect you. Conrad did not take the paper. No. Belinda's fingers tightened. One sentence would preserve my name. That sentence would injure Nerissa again. You would sacrifice me to save your marriage. I sacrificed my wife to save my pride. I won't repeat the act. The words left no room for negotiation. At Nerissa's signal, the solicitor entered and placed the sealed, technical summary on the table. Lady Belinda, your statement would be relevant, but it is not necessary. The recovered plates, masks, registration frame, progressive proofs, both lantern slides, studio records, porter's statement, editor's memorandum, financial remittance, and controlled reconstruction establish a substantial chain for public and legal examination. Belinda looked at Nerissa. Then you've already decided what I am. No, Nerissa said. You decided what I was allowed to become in your picture. The evidence will show what you chose. Belinda rose. At the doorway, she turned toward Conrad. She will never forgive you. Conrad did not glance at Nerissa before answering. That is hers to decide. Belinda left with her companion. Lady Marjorie and the solicitor withdrew into the morning room, but left the connecting door ajar. The drawing room became quiet. Conrad remained several feet from Nerissa. The public examination will proceed, he said. Even if Belinda's counsel threatens every committee connected to us. Yes, even if the room laughs when you admit you believed her. Yes, even if nothing I do changes where you live. Conrad met her gaze. Yes. Nerissa crossed the distance between them. He did not reach for her. She lifted one hand and touched his cheek. The restraint in his face gave way for a single breath. May I kiss you? He asked. Yes. Nerissa leaned toward him first. The kiss began gently, with all the care required by trust still under repair. Conrad's hand rose to her waist and rested there lightly, giving her every freedom to withdraw. She did not. She answered the kiss with quiet certainty, then ended it when she chose. Conrad did not follow when she drew back. I won't use this to hurry you, he said. Good. Her thumb moved once along his cheek before she lowered her hand. Because I'm not returning as a duchess being defended. How will you stand before them? As the woman who presents the proof. Conrad inclined his head. Then I'll stand where you ask. By evening, invitations had gone to the dinner guests, the lecture committee, every principal witness, and the Metropolitan Police Inspector. The place named was Merritt's North Light Studio, where no seating rank could place Nerissa beneath the truth. On the 30th of March, Merritt's North Light Studio became the one room in London where rank could not alter the direction of a shadow. The glass roof held a pale spring sky above rows of chairs arranged without precedence. Guests from the Brackenhurst dinner sat beside members of the lecture committee, photographic specialists, charitable patrons, and several editors who had received the Crofton retraction notice, but not yet the full proof. Mrs. Ada Ellison had brought the St. Anne's album under the solicitor's supervision. Clement Rook held his original portrait in a flat portfolio. Miss Winifred Talbot waited beside Samuel Pike and Tobias Merritt. At the rear stood a Metropolitan Police Inspector with 2 constables. Their presence did not turn the studio into a court. Merritt had filed a formal complaint concerning the stolen negatives and green baize case. The inspector had reviewed the search inventory. Talbot's signed statement, Pike's identification of the Crofton carriage, and the financial records. He was authorized to act if the objects and witnesses were identified before him. Basil sat with counsel near the aisle. Belinda occupied a separate chair with her companion and the Crofton family solicitor. Nerissa entered with Lady Marjorie and took her place beside the evidence table. Conrad stood several feet behind her until the family solicitor announced that the examination could begin. Then he stepped forward alone. Before Her Grace presents any evidence, he said, I must state what no photograph can excuse. The studio quieted. Conrad looked first at Nerissa, then at the guests who had raised their glasses at his dinner. I believed an image over my wife's direct denial. I allowed Lady Belinda's account to carry more authority than the word of the woman who had shared my life for 8 years. I then toasted Lady Belinda before witnesses who understood the accusation. I lacked the courage to speak plainly. Several dinner guests lowered their eyes. Conrad continued. After the South Kensington lecture, I withdrew the Brackenhurst survey without consulting the Duchess. I told myself I was preventing further injury. In truth, I erased her real work because I feared another public scandal. These choices were mine. Whatever the evidence proves today, I was wrong before it became safe to admit that I was wrong. He stepped back without asking the room for sympathy. Nerissa moved to the table. The false image will be examined in 3 stages. First, the 2 people it joined. Second, the mechanical construction. Third, the human intention behind it. Mrs. Ellison opened the St. Anne's album to the unretouched contact print of Nerissa. Standing alone at the east doorway on the 24th of February, she identified the matron's account book, the luncheon entry, the 2 female assistants, and the maid who had accompanied Nerissa. The album had never left St. Anne's until that morning. Clement Rook then placed his original portrait before the room. It showed him alone outside the Vesper Club on the 12th of February. I never met Her Grace privately, he said. I never stood beside her, and I never consented to my image being joined with hers. Merritt opened his studio register under the inspector's observation. Plate 317 belonged to Rook. Plate 421 belonged to Nerissa. The entries were 12 days apart. Both negatives had been marked retained. No joint sitting existed. The family solicitor then opened the sealed carrier recovered from Lambeth. The two source negatives were displayed by their edges beneath the north light. One held Rook alone. The other held Nerissa alone. The inspector checked the plate numbers against the search inventory. Nerissa faced the room. The first stage is complete. 2 separate lives. 2 separate dates. No shared exposure. The skylight shutters were lowered. Gas lamps dimmed. The independent examiner placed the recovered brass registration frame upon the demonstration table and displayed the 2 black paper masks. He showed how one mask shielded the area around Ruke, while the other isolated Nerissa's figure from the St. Anne's doorway. The 3 progressive proofs followed. The first left a wide space between them. The second brought Nerissa nearer. The final proof placed her shoulder beneath Ruka's lowered face. In violet pencil, Belinda's instruction remained visible. Bring her grace nearer to him. Basil's crop measurements appeared on the adjoining margin. Lecture slide A was removed from the padded box in which it had remained since South Kensington. Retained slide B was opened separately from the evidence recovered at Lambeth. The examiner confirmed that both derived from the same constructed arrangement. He inserted the source images into the magic lantern in sequence. Rook appeared alone, then Nerissa alone. Finally, using the controlled reconstruction prepared on the 27th, the false scene appeared. Enlarged light exposed every deception. Nerissa's shadow fell toward the street, while the doorway's shadow leaned toward the wall. The camera height changed between figure and background. A pale masking line followed her shoulder. The retouched hem concealed where the cut edge had damaged the dress. No one needed a duke's opinion. The contradiction stood upon the screen. The recovered masks and frame reproduce the altered cabinet card, the examiner said. Both lantern slides and the mounted print arise from the same combination process. The figures were never photographed together. The lamps rose. Nerissa turned to the 3rd stage. Miss Talbot identified Belinda's violet instruction and Basil's written measurements. She described the 6 mounted cabinet cards and exactly 2 lantern slides. She repeated the threat concerning her father's debt. She also repeated Belinda's promise that House Crofton would relieve Basil's private note if the scheme succeeded. Samuel Pike testified that he carried the green baize case into a Crofton carriage on the 27th of February and saw it turn south rather than toward Grosvenor Square. Mr. Fenwick's memorandum was read aloud. Belinda had visited the Sentinel Review on the 4th of March, described the false card before being shown it, and claimed she was negotiating the withdrawal of all copies. The Crofton storage account proved the Lambeth warehouse was paid through family funds. The remittance record showed that part of Basil's private debt was assumed shortly after the plates were removed. Basil rose. This proves only that a technical demonstration was mishandled. The police inspector looked toward him. Sit down, Lord Basil. Basil remained standing. Miss Talbot is a frightened employee influenced by ducal protection. She received no payment, Nerissa said. Her lodging and employment were secured without condition, and the dates were recorded before this examination. Belinda rose more slowly. I tried to prevent harm once. Basil went too far. Nerissa looked at the projected false image, now dark upon the screen. You selected the cabinet mount because it looked respectable. You ordered my figure brought nearer. You knew where the editor's copy had gone. You prepared yourself to become the woman society trusted beside Conrad after my disgrace. Belinda turned toward Conrad. You needed someone to preserve your political household. I needed to believe my wife, he replied. My need was not your permission. The Crofton family solicitor placed a written undertaking on the table. House Crofton would send formal retractions to every editor, committee member, and dinner guest known to have received or seen the image. Belinda would leave London before the week ended. Conrad withdrew all Redgrave patronage from committees under her direction. He did not demand that others ruin her. The consequences followed the truth already established. The inspector then approached Basil. Lord Basil Crofton, you are being placed under arrest on suspicion of theft of studio property, fraudulent use of ducal authority, and coercion connected with debt pressure. The charges will be considered at the police court. You are not required to make any statement here. Basil looked toward Conrad, but found no office left to borrow. One constable received his gloves and walking stick, while the other accompanied him from the studio. No applause followed. The chair of the exhibition committee rose and announced that the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey would be restored under its proper credit. Directed and supervised by Nerissa Redgrave, Duchess of Brackenhurst, Mrs. Ellison closed the St. Anne's album and returned it to her own keeping. Clement Rook replaced his portrait in its portfolio. Merritt's negatives, frame, masks, proofs, and green case remained under legal seal pending proceedings. At last, the senior housekeeper from Brackenhurst House came forward carrying a folded cloth. Upon it rested the old blackened silver ring with all 7 household keys. Nerissa did not reach for it. The housekeeper reported that the 7 duties once carried by the Duchess had been assigned to 7 proper officers under written registers. Linen, wine, silver, household accounts, medicines, receiving rooms, and archives would no longer depend upon one woman's invisible labor. Conrad addressed the room. No Duchess of Brackenhurst will again be made the silent bearer of every burden this house prefers not to see. The key ring was carried away for retirement in the Redgrave archive. When the public session ended, Nerissa entered the adjoining anteroom. Conrad followed only after she looked back and allowed it. The door remained ajar. I love you, he said. I loved you when I lacked the courage to make love visible. I loved your competence because it made my life easier, and I failed to see the loneliness beneath it. I love you now without believing that love gives me ownership of your work, your home, or your forgiveness. Nerissa held his gaze. I love you too, his breath caught, but I will never return to the marriage I left. Then I won't ask for it back. He remained where he was. I'll ask whether we may build another. Nerissa crossed the distance and placed her arms around him. Conrad waited until the embrace was certain before returning it. When she lifted her face, she touched his cheek. The kiss they shared was brief, tender, and freely answered. Nerissa ended it, and Conrad let her go without pursuit. Beyond the open doorway, the false image had already been removed from the screen. On the 15th of May, 46 days after the public examination at Merritt's studio, Conrad arrived at Copley House with a calling note in his own hand, and waited in the entrance hall until Nerissa gave permission for him to enter. He had followed the same practice on every visit since the 30th of March. He did not send ahead the authority of a duke. He did not treat marriage as a key. Some afternoons Nerissa received him in the drawing-room with Lady Marjorie nearby. On others, they walked in the small Kensington garden, while her maid remained within sight of the windows. Twice they had disagreed over committee appointments. Once Nerissa, a rejected steward Conrad, recommended because the man had described female supervision as a temporary inconvenience. Conrad examined the letters, admitted he had valued efficiency over judgment, and withdrew the name without calling the decision a concession. The changes were not dramatic enough for society columns. That was why Nerissa trusted them. Brackenhurst House no longer served as their marital residence. Its household had been reduced with proper references and pensions. Its administrative offices moved to separate rooms near Grosvenor Square, and the great house was being prepared for a long lease. Nerissa had not crossed its threshold since the night of the toast. The old blackened key ring remained in the Redgrave archive beside a written account of why its 7 duties had been divided among 7 officers. Copley House remained hers under her mother's marriage settlement. Conrad entered only when invited, and he never referred to the arrangement as temporary. When he joined Nerissa in the conservatory that afternoon, he carried a narrow, padded case beneath one arm. Tobias Merritt stood beside a camera mounted upon a wooden tripod. Miss Winifred Talbot checked the plate holder near the temporary darkroom. Her new appointment at an independent photographic archive had begun the previous week. The post was administered through a trust beyond the control of House Redgrave or House Crofton. Her father's debt remained subject to lawful terms rather than private purchase, and no one could claim her future had been exchanged for testimony. Basil Crofton had appeared before the police court and remained subject to proceedings concerning the stolen plates, coercion, and fraudulent use of ducal authority. Belinda had left London under the supervision of her family. Written retractions had reached every editor, committee member, and dinner guest known to have seen the false image. The first restored catalogue of the Brackenhurst Improvement Survey now bore the line Nerissa had refused to accept as compensation and later accepted as fact. Directed and supervised by Nerissa Redgrave, Duchess of Brackenhurst, Merritt adjusted the lens. 1 exposure, he said. No alteration beyond ordinary fixing and washing. No retouching, Nerissa replied. None. No painted scenery. Only the conservatory wall, the garden door, and whatever the light chooses to record. Conrad set the padded case on a small table. I brought the other cup. He did not open it. I wasn't certain you would want it included. Nerissa looked toward the cabinet near the garden doors. Bring mine, please, she told her maid. The silver cup from their wedding breakfast was carried into the conservatory in its linen-wrapped box. Nerissa opened it herself. Conrad then opened his case. The 2 plain cups rested side by side upon the table, their engraved initials darkened by nearly 9 years. He touched neither. May they remain in the photograph, he asked. Nerissa considered the request. The cups had once represented vows spoken before either of them understood how easily love could hide inside duty and call itself sufficient. Yet neither object had betrayed her. People had done that. Objects only carried the meanings given to them. Yes, she said, place them where the camera can see them, but not between us. Conrad set both cups on a small conservatory table near the open garden door. Sunlight caught their rims. No crest stood behind them. No Redgrave seal marked the scene. Merritt indicated the plain chair before the camera. Nerissa chose not to sit. She stood beside it in a soft grey-blue gown, one hand resting lightly against the carved back. Conrad took his place a measured distance away. Your Grace, Merritt said to him, the composition will appear more natural if your hand rests near her Grace's. Conrad did not move. He looked at Nerissa, and waited. The silence did not embarrass her. It honored the choice within it. Nerissa extended her right hand first. Conrad turned his palm upward beneath it. She placed her fingers in his, arranging the contact exactly as she wished. Only after she gave a small answering pressure did his hand close around hers. He stepped nearer, but not enough to obscure her figure or pull her into his shadow. "Hold still," Merritt said. Nerissa looked into the dark circle of the lens. She remembered the false photograph that had dragged her toward a man she had never met, the painted doorway, the divided shadows, and the respectful cabinet mount chosen to make a lie appear ordinary. This image required no invented closeness. Conrad's shoulder did not touch hers. His hand did because she had placed it there. The distinction mattered more than any pose. Merritt removed the lens cap. The exposure lasted only seconds. Conrad's hand remained steady beneath hers. When the cap returned, he did not release her until she lifted her fingers. Miss Talbot carried the plate holder into the darkroom. Merritt followed. Lady Marjorie, who had supervised from a chair beside the garden door, rose with an expression of deliberate innocence. "I believe the garden requires inspection before supper." "There are no roses in bloom," Nerissa said. "Then I shall examine their intentions." She disappeared into the garden, leaving the door open behind her. Conrad looked toward the camera. "I lived beside you for 8 years and allowed a false image to teach me how little I had learned to see. You are seeing better now, because you taught me." Nerissa shook her head. "Because you chose to learn." He accepted the correction. "Yes, because I chose to learn." Her maid returned to carry the 2 silver cups from the conservatory table into the dining room. Conrad watched them go. "I won't assume their use merely because you permitted their image." "Good." Nerissa's mouth softened. "You may ask at supper." That evening, no guests filled the table. No committee expected a performance. Lady Marjorie retired early after declaring that reconciliation required privacy and a proper pudding in equal measure. Nerissa and Conrad sat opposite one another in Copley House's small dining room while May air moved through the open windows. The 2 wedding cups stood upon the sideboard. Conrad rose, brought them to the table, and stopped before placing either one. "May we use them again?" he asked. Nerissa looked at the silver, at the cups they had raised on the 12th of November, 1875, beneath chapel windows streaked with rain. Their first marriage, as they had lived it, could not be restored. That was no longer a tragedy. It was the condition that made honesty possible. Nerissa set 1 cup before Conrad and drew the other toward herself. "Yes, not for the marriage we had, for the truth we intend to keep." Conrad filled both with wine. He lifted his cup without adopting the practiced voice of a public toast. "To what you choose freely." Nerissa raised hers. "To what we do faithfully after the choosing." Silver touched silver with one clear note. They drank. Conrad set down his cup. "I love you." The words no longer arrived as plea, climax, or defense. They belonged to the ordinary room. "I love you when you agree with me, when you refuse me, and when you show me what I would rather not see. I love you without believing. Love gives me ownership of your work, your home, or your forgiveness." Nerissa rose and crossed the short distance between them. "I love you too," she said, "not because you exposed Belinda, not because you restored my name. It was mine before you recognized it. I love you because you finally learned to stand beside what you cannot control." She placed one hand against his cheek and kissed him. Conrad answered without haste. His hand rested lightly at her waist, only after she moved closer. The kiss deepened into warmth, then ended where Nerissa chose, with their foreheads near and their hands joined between them. Later, the unretouched print dried in Merritt's workroom. It showed Conrad and Nerissa in the Copley Conservatory, without painted scenery, corrected faces, borrowed symbols, or false intimacy. Her hand rested in his because she had placed it there. Behind them, the garden door stood open. On the small table beside it, 2 plain silver wedding cups caught the May light. Nerissa had walked away forever from Brackenhurst House. She had walked away forever from invisible service, mistaken for devotion. She had not walked away from love. Once, love learned to honor the woman standing plainly within it.